good CFOs tend to understand the business, but this puts an additional challenge in itself to really get into depth and understanding what drives business and how do you proactively also take some of these actions and drive business as a finance professional yourself and supporting the operations team and your colleague, right?
Thank you for listening to the podcast thus far. The one favor I would ask, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, is to press the follow and subscribe button on whatever media platform you listen to us, as it helps us grow our network and grow the podcast. So thank you and enjoy the podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Alchemy Search podcast. I'm Lewis, Principal Consultant at Alchemy Search. Today we are joined by Tarek Sayed. Tarek is a transformational CFO whose career spans more than 2 decades. Tarek's leadership journey includes pivotal roles at some of the world's most dynamic organisations. Majid Futtaim Ventures, he oversaw a diverse portfolio of businesses, spearheading finance transformation and operational excellence. As CFO for Mastercard's Middle East and Africa business, Tarek restructured finance teams across 55 countries, driving cultural change and supporting major M&A transactions. Tarek began his career with General Electric, holding key roles in finance, operations and audits across Europe, the US and Latin America, as well as senior finance leadership roles at Vodafone Group, delivering dramatic turnarounds in both market share and profitability. Known for his ability to build high-performing teams, drive strategic change and deliver sustainable growth, Tarek is a trusted advisor to boards and CEOs alike. Tarek, welcome to the Alchemy podcast. How's things?
Good. Thank you. It's great to be here. First of all, thank you for inviting me. Things are great. Just very busy these days.
Busy's good, no?
Busy is good. And, it's somehow just like, you go through the typical cycles where pre-summer just gets crazy. And then, basically by July, things are going to just die down a bit.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's the same for our business at the moment. We're definitely riding a bit of a wave at the moment, just building till summer, and then I guess July, August it slows down a bit. So What we're in May? What was it? Mid-May now? End of May? Yeah. So a few more weeks and then a quiet summer. So not too long. But thank you for joining. I think what would be useful is just to start really. Give us a quick snapshot of your career from obviously pre the UAE and up to today.
Absolutely. So I always kind of just say I have 3 chapters in my career, right? Just the first one was GE. So I started my career in a typical, one of the graduate programs in GE, and then, spent about 13 years with them, just really having about 20 jobs almost in at least 10 different countries, right? So it's kind of just a lot of moving around, and I'm an engineer by education, but just turned into finance in like 3 years in. And then just at some point transitioned into what I would say traditional finance, typical FP&A roles, commercial finance type roles, and then became the CFO of one of the businesses and then the European director of FP&A, who's GE. And then moved to the second chapter where I moved to Vodafone and relocated to Egypt, had a few stints in Egypt, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then finally in the UK where, I was doing different CFO jobs for operating companies or, just some of our global verticals. And then my third chapter is here, and we moved here in 2018, where I moved with Mastercard as the CFO for Middle East and Africa, and then spent a couple of years there, and then spent a few years with MAF as the CFO for one of their verticals before, just last year going out and starting my own consultancy. And it's been crazy ever since.
Fair enough. So we'll come on to the consultancy in a bit more detail later. But I know one topic you're really passionate about, and I know a lot of senior finance professionals at the moment talk around transformation, but rather than high level, one point you're particularly interested in is around systems. So systems in terms of transformation. So tell us what you mean by that.
Absolutely. And it's the, maybe I'll start with a story, right? Just my very first job in GE was in customer service, and it happened to be in Germany. And I walk in, and about a month into the job, the business is going through an ERP implementation. Right, and somehow I was probably just because I was the the newest guy, so I got the short stick. Tarek, you're going to be part of the project team. So I spent about 8 months just working as part of the project team on the implementation, and it was a nightmare. We were implementing SAP at that time, and that was late 90s. and it was kind of like, especially as a first job, it left a mark for sure. So throughout a long period, I was never really into the systems part as much as I was into kind of like the business side, right? But when you kind of just think of how things have been changing in the last few years, it's been crazy. When if you bring it back to the late 90s, just big ERPs were the thing, right? So every aspiring business would look to eventually grow enough to implement an SAP or an Oracle, and that became, the thing. And then with time, ERPs integrated HR modules, supply chain, etc. So they became like these big mammoth, just if you will, that were great because basically they provided you with everything. But at the same time, they were extremely rigid. They are expensive, and they become legacy systems that businesses think 100 times before trying to upgrade them, because it's a huge 12 months plus project, right? We went through the cloud phase, just in 2010 and plus, which probably made it a bit easier. We started going through the modular phase, where you started having, the subsystems that actually then integrate much better. But it was still kind of just a bit of a hybrid. And it was really just, I think, in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years that things have been changing quite a bit with AI-powered systems. And then getting into more modular systems that integrate seamlessly with each other. So the idea of going through a system implementation that takes years, and that nightmare has become, a bit of a thing of the past in a way, in some aspects, right? And I spent the last year just looking into just what's out there in the space, and you realize while obviously the big ERPs are still quite good for their use, right? And they've been continuing to improve them, and they've also just powered them with AI. Some of the more specialized systems are fantastic. So you have, for example, an AP module that gives you 70% efficiency in how you run your accounts payable process, right? No ERP would be able to give you that, right? You look at some of the of the systems today that do fraud prevention or that do risk systems, so just underwriting, and they are extremely more efficient, a lot more effective than anything that was out there in the market before, right? So we kind of just were moving more to a world where it's almost democratizing data and systems, and helping especially SMEs to an extent catch up and be able to compete with some of the tools that were almost exclusive to bigger enterprises, right? So now when you kind of just look at mid-sized businesses, you no longer have to necessarily worry about going with the big ERP solution. You kind of just, you either still do a core of that to get some of the control, but also then complement that with a lot of hybrid modules that do exactly what you want and that give you the agility to change and upgrade as you need to, right? Bigger businesses are thinking along the same lines. How do I actually get the best of both worlds, right? I still want my control and kind of just want some of the rigidity, if you will, but at the same time, I just want the agility and the flexibility and the evolution, right? So it is very interesting now to just watch that space and to try to work with some of the companies on what makes sense over the next few years, because also just the time span and the lifetime of some of these systems is becoming shorter and shorter because technology is expanding rapidly, right? So, but I love the idea of the ability, or basically being able to help especially SMEs in competing with some of the better tools with their, I would say, bigger brothers and sisters.
Is there a limitation in terms of scale? So you get to a point in time as a medium business where you have to go for the big SAP and Oracle. Is that maybe a problem they face, or?
Yeah, there's definitely a component of scale to this, right? So you think of, for example, a big supermarket chain that runs millions and millions of transactions. You want the stability of an ERP in your core, right? Just because it's like millions of transactions passing through, and it's not just only about this. You kind of just, once you reach a certain size, you want a bit of that stability and the ability to manage that. But then, and as I said, you still complement that with agile systems that you build on top to still get the functionality that you want, right? So it's going to continue, in my mind, to be a bit of a hybrid of both worlds as we continue to evolve.
So now that the smaller businesses, like you say, have the functionality which maybe they didn't have before. Yeah, systems is a challenge, right? Because every business we ever speak to, I mean, everyone's going through an ERP implementation or upgrade. And I guess it's without that being so efficient within your business, I guess it's just not going to really work for the finance team. We've got a client now I'm working with, and they've actually just hired a systems manager specifically to really overhaul and manage the system. But I guess the challenge is you can't stop the moving train.
Yeah.
So this person's got to go in now and deal with all of the prehistoric processes and how it was all set up, and somehow put it into, I guess, action to be as efficient moving forward, which I'm not quite sure how you would approach that. I did ask him what he would do as a starting point, and I'm sure he's an expert, so he's got plans. But yeah, systems, they're just they're key, really, aren't they, for an effective function?
Yeah, and you can't talk about transformation without talking about technology, right? At the end of the day, so it's becoming a key part of just the of the components of transformation. You look at talking about clients, just I have a couple of clients that have also just grown significantly in the last few years, and then you look at the way they were running, and it's a lot of manual processes, a lot of just legacy old systems that were not being utilized effectively, and as they scaled, now that's becoming a hindrance, and it's just not feasible anymore. So you really kind of just both of them are stepping onto kind of just a journey or a roadmap to just say, how do we actually move from here to just basically that point where we are operating as $1 billion company or as a $500 million company type of thing.
I guess some firms grow so quick that the system can't keep up, right?
Absolutely.
And if you can get it to keep up, I guess you'd be in a better place, but it's easier said than done. So transformation then from a people point of view. So tell us a bit about that.
That's, again, I was just saying you can't talk about transformation without technology and systems. You absolutely cannot talk about transformation without talking about people, right? And just the as we're just, you look at the region, and the region is still predominantly driven by family businesses, right? Just like at least 2/3 of the companies here are family businesses. A lot of them, especially in the last few years, have grown, scaled. And I'm not talking just about the big conglomerates, right? Just that have been huge for the last 10, 20 years. I'm talking also about some of the mid-sized businesses that have grown quite significantly in size. And a big aspect now that some of those businesses are facing is people development, right? Succession planning, just the about half of the businesses in the region today are going to go through a transition soon from the second to the third generation, right? That is quite big, right? And again, just in a similar way, in just to processes and systems, what you can do as a $100 million business is not at all what you can do as a $1 billion type business, or just anywhere in that spectrum. So development, or talent retention, succession planning, development becomes extremely important, right? At some point I started a role, right, as a CFO, right, and as I actually, in my first week, I'm just taking stock of my team. I had 8 direct reports, and what I realized very quickly was that 6 of those 8 direct reports actually were recruited from the outside, right? And then from those 6, all of them were hired on a certain job, and they were still doing exactly that same job today, right, when I joined. And then you add to that the minimum tenure that any one of my direct reports had was 3.5 years up to 9 years, right? Those were the stats, and you look at this, and I look across my entire organization, as in my finance organization, and it was a very similar story. Of course, at the junior level, it's a bit better because just people rotate a bit more, but it was still quite drastic just in comparison, right? And that's, there is a bit of this thing where companies sometimes just hire for a job or build jobs rather than help people build careers, right? And that becomes a problem, especially when a business kind of just continues to scale and as time evolves, then the next time you start looking for your next CEO, your next, CFO, etc., you're going to have to just go outside again and hire from the outside, right? So this is where a lot of the companies, I think, today in the region are definitely talking about succession planning or talking about development. But there's still a bit of a gap between kind of just the theoretical conversation and the actual implementation on the ground, right? As I mentioned, I grew up in the school of GE and
renowned to progress and succession plan, right?
Just especially in the 90s, it was probably just the trailblazing company when it came to leadership development. They've institutionalized by then the whole concept of development, and it wasn't necessarily about going to trainings. It wasn't about going to anything. If kind of just it was predominantly how do you get a variety of assignments that continue to challenge and develop you, right? And then you're sometimes you're thrown into the deep water, and so, to see if you can sink or swim, right? And then you get some help and so on. But it's you look at my career, for example. As I said, I had about almost 20 jobs in a span of a 13 years career, and sometimes that's a bit. You'd argue that's a bit too short sometimes. But it was kind of just a lot of this fast-paced moving, and then you're also working with some great people that you're learning from, and then you're moving to just see some other examples that you can learn from, right? And it's that part I think that companies need to do more consistently, right? So one thing is to have a succession plan that actually you present, for example, to the board and just basically put it on your desk. The other is actually to live it every day, right? Having a succession planning session or a talent development review every 6 months is one thing. Agreeing on actions and implementing them and then following up on those and again doing it consistently is a whole different thing. So there's, and that takes time, because basically just you got to start with how do you help people develop their career path, and how do you help them see just what are some of the right assignments for them that would set them up to continue to move up, right? I think, there is a recognition of the importance of it. But as I said, I think we're still probably at the early parts of the journey, right? Definitely. And I see it now, especially with a lot of the clients, again, just that I work with, where you realize, because of the nature of how the business grew, it's a one or two man show, but there's still a big gap between kind of like the senior level and the teams behind them, and it's more how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've rarely had conversations in the last few years when they've mentioned about succession planning. It's about hiring for now, and it's like, we've got a problem, we must fix it. Yeah. We need to hire someone now, and I think a lot of the time it's a replacement, right? And it's like the world's going to end if we don't get someone in quickly, and it's just find the best person. But in a lot of hiring managers' minds, it seems to be hire someone who knows everything already. Yeah. There's very little time of, you tick 7 out of 10 boxes, but you've got 3 areas you need to learn and we'll help you. Yeah. It's, Lewis, you must be able to tick 10 out of 10 because they need to know everything. Yeah. So I agree. I think there is a journey that needs to be had, but I mean, I don't know how you really get that process to move. But yeah, the multinationals definitely have good schools. There's a lot of people I speak to. Unilever's probably another one. Mondelez, some of these big FMCG firms I've seen where you're there for 10 years, but you've actually had 6 jobs. So you haven't need to move because you've done a different job every couple of years. But I guess the only challenge with that I see is people get to a ceiling in this region exactly because there's one CFO. Yes. Right? So you've got a lot of people at this kind of head of finance level, been with a business 10 years, but where do they go? And I think that's a topic for another day. But for senior finance professionals, what are your options once you're at the top? Is there's very few. But I understand what you're saying. So CFO, popular topic is around the role changing, but you've got quite an interesting point you made to me off offline, I guess, around the convergence of the CFO and the COO and what you're seeing. So tell us a bit about that.
If you take it 20 years back, and especially like maybe just in this region, but overall, the CFO role a lot of times or sometimes actually had HR, for example, and IT reporting into it, right? And at that time or at that point, I think none of them were regarded as strategic or important functions. Just the HR was there for hiring and firing, IT was there to kind of just keep the lights on, and finance was just, counting the numbers, if you will, right? And I think at some point that school of thought evolved into understanding kind of just the strategic importance of, for example, HR as a strategic partner of finance and so on. So you started having more of that separation, if you will, right? In the last years, just especially just post-COVID, there's been a lot of call for businesses to, number one, drive more efficiency, become just a lot more nimble and efficient. And number two, also just for the finance community to continue to support the back to growth plans, right? And this is where, there was an expectation from the CFOs to move more into supporting the business, right? So at some point in the last, couple of years, I was actually leading pricing in our business, which is a very commercial function, right? Just, and it was more, how do you kind of just transfer or transition the pricing function into just a more dynamic function as you move, right? So you see, and I think that phenomenon is also just happening globally. As you see more and more CFOs starting to just not only participate in developing strategy, but also helping in the execution of that strategy. You look at PayPal, and PayPal just actually earlier this year, I think, just announced their CFO to become the CFO and the chief operating officer as well, to basically just be able to drive that conversions as you go forward. So there's a bit of that dynamic that's happening, which is almost pushing the CFOs to expand their role, whether it's in the leading big business projects in the technology space, whether it's in leading the charge in some of the operational optimization and so on. But it is definitely expanding that scope of the role to just beyond the numbers, if you will. Which creates a challenge, right? If you think about it, because at the end of the day, also, good CFOs tend to understand the business, but this puts an additional challenge in itself to really get into depth and understanding what drives business and how do you proactively also take some of these actions and drive business as a finance professional yourself and supporting the operations team and your colleague, right? And not everybody's ready for it, right?
So if you was because obviously we'll come on to your new venture at the moment, but if you're in a CFO role right now, are you thinking, should you be upskilling yourself maybe in more on the business side? Like, what advice would you give to those CFOs who do see that convergence as the next step?
Yeah, first and foremost, and I'll tell you something that one of my mentors told me as I took my first CFO role, and he said, "Okay, Tarek, first thing you got to do is put your house in order." So before thinking about upskilling, before thinking about anything, rule number one is make sure that you have the right controllership in place, you have the right infrastructure in place, the right compliance in place, before you think about doing all the
shiny
fun,
stuff.
fancy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So and I know that goes kind of just against everything that we've been talking about, but the reality is, just the core and the starting, the cornerstone of the job is to still safeguard the business, right? So I think, first
it goes
advice,
without saying, right?
Absolutely.
People may not,
yeah,
take it for granted, I guess.
Yeah, and it's, and sometimes you kind of just have to not take it for granted in that sense. So that, in my mind, continues to be just the cornerstone. It's like, make sure that is covered, and only when you have the right team in place and kind of just in the right setup is where you start kind of just looking into the other side and how do you drive business. But yeah, I think this, one of the biggest, I think, obviously topics today is AI, and it's just a question of, again, technology, AI, how do you then continue to, number one, understand the business in depth, and understand the implication of just what technology is driving, not only on your finance function, but where you can deploy it effectively in the business, right? And then how do you then drive that on an ongoing basis in the most effective way? Because, what is happening sometimes is, because you still don't know what's going to stick, people use a lot of the shotgun approach, right? Just like, let's try 100 different things, and then just hopefully something will stick. It's only by really understanding the business in depth and being able to assess the implication of some of the technology enhancements that you're, able to hopefully drive a lot more of a laser focus on what are the few things that matter, and then driving those to execution.
Do you still see or feel, maybe from personal experience, but hear from your peers, resistance from other maybe members of the C-suite or whatever, when the CFO is trying to get more involved in the business, right? And they maybe perceive you as, no, you're the CFO. Why are you getting involved with X topic? Is that still quite prominent, you see, in organizations, or are people slowly starting to understand the CFO role is more than just an accountant like it traditionally was seen as?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. I think I've had roles where it was quite a challenge. I've had roles where, the team kind of just viewed some of the challenges more as, we're all kind of just in the same boat trying to improve. So I wouldn't say that we've all evolved into that, and because at the same time, you still see CFOs kind of just approaching the business from a very finance point of view as well. So it's not only kind of like that the business is actually challenging and is asking the finance guys, just why are you trying to get into the business side? It's also the CFOs just sometimes not necessarily stepping or leaning forward enough to actually become a business partner, right? So it's converging, but you'll always, I think, continue to have that tension. It's not about tension. It's just the question of how do you continue to resolve it in the best interest of the business.
Yeah, and then leadership style, how has that been impacted? How have you seen that change during your career, and especially in this region?
Yeah, it's interesting when you kind of just think of all the changes that we're talking about, right? You have changes in the technology world. You have just talk about succession planning and the expansion of the role. All this comes with uncertainty, right? And a lot of challenges. When you look at the role, if you're actually stepping into the role of a CFO today, it's a much more complex role than what it was 10 years ago, right? And one of the things that really helps is potentially to embrace authentic leadership, right? It's a concept that I got introduced to for the first time 10 years ago, and was working for Vodafone, and we were on one of the leadership programs, and they took X numbers of leaders across the globe into a 1-year program, which was fantastic. And that was the first module, right? So it was the first day of the first module. So, the group was really getting to know each other. And almost in that first session, the person coordinating the program just starts talking about vulnerability, right? And then she asks every single person to go around the room and basically to tell the rest of the room a story that had a significant impact on them, right? And like I was almost shocked, just people were talking about really life stories.
Day one, you barely know any of these people, right?
We don't know each other. There were tears. I mean, there were some stories that was like, about a sibling that passed away. There were stories about just fights with illnesses. There was like really just like you look at the people and like there's so much courage in the room, but there's also such emotion, right? And it was genuinely a profound changing experience for me, right? As I said, I think of before that because of the nature of how I moved a lot between countries and between jobs and so on, you kind of just when working for an American company for quite some time, you develop a bit of this rough sense around you, right? So you can, and you become a lot more authoritative by default and just in results driven more than anything else. So that has been me for quite some time, maybe just up to that point, right? And you go through this experience, and all of a sudden, just you finish the week together, and that's almost a group that became friends for life type of thing, right?
In a WhatsApp group 10 years later.
Yeah, no, it's like I think I have a couple of them that are very good friends of mine that we still
great.
kind of just connect, but it was, as I said, the first introduction of vulnerability, authenticity, and actually being transparent and honest and being able to open up and share how you feel and kind of just in an open way, right? So that carried with me, just and I continued to start integrating that a bit more and more, kind of just also as a leader, right? And you start kind of just also realizing that it is quite impactful, right? And now you kind of just translate that to today's world, and with a lot of the changes, reality is we don't know still a lot of the answers. Right? I don't know what are the 100% right systems to implement. I don't know necessarily, how we're going to drive every aspect of the business, right? But being honest about that actually makes the team actually trust that they are part of the decision-making process, and because they genuinely are, right? So it's not like there's a hidden agenda anywhere. It's I went through in the last few years a couple of restructuring exercises, and those are never really easy, right? They're some of the most awful things that a leader has to do, right? Because we've gone about it in the most transparent way and in the most humane way possible, and have communicated proactively everything that I could. And the process, although again never easy and quite painful, was still probably the smoothest it could be given the circumstances. Just and people kind of just said afterwards, it's this went better than expected. Again,
because you showed that vulnerability and
communicated in the most transparent way on what I do know, what I don't know, and kind of just with very clear timelines and expectations and so on. So, and that's probably one of the worst situations, as I said, that a leader can go through. There are also just a lot of business situations where you don't know, as I said, right? So the more you communicate openly about this, the better you are just as a team in the same boat. Sometimes I actually realized we were brought up to, for example, as a leader, never show whether it's vulnerability. Never if you're having a bad day, you're expected to hide it, right? And then you realize just actually, no, you don't need to. Sometimes it's actually okay to share that with kind of just with your peers, with your team, and again, and that tells them it's okay for them also sometimes to have a bad day and to actually share that or to give you feedback around some of this. So I think when you kind of just think of the world that we have today and all the challenges and the moving parts, adapting a more authentic leadership style, I think is almost key to be able to navigate through that with the team.
I think it just demonstrates you're human at the end of the day, right? And you've just got a different job. It's not, I think in the past, maybe there was this kind of fear that, the CFO is untouchable or this is not a normal person, right? But like you said, you're just doing the job. And if you can go through some of those situations and show that vulnerability, then maybe you can manage it better than it was in the past. So post-corporate world then, so what was it, around a year ago you decided to embark on like an entrepreneurial journey, shall we call it? So
absolutely,
talk us through that.
Yeah, it's about a year ago, just a bit more than a year ago, and it's been shaping and reshaping and just continuing to reshape the journey. But but we kind of we now do three things. So as I said, I run a consultancy. We do three things. One is corporate services. So you have a significant influx of companies that are getting set up here now. So we help companies kind of just incorporate here, choose the right jurisdiction, help them with their actual setup, and then provide typical corporate services from just the accounting, audit, taxation, etc. So that's kind of just the what I'd call just normal, plain vanilla, just set up corporate services. In an effective and efficient way for the companies, right? So that's one vertical that we run. The second vertical is around transformation. So everything we kind of just talked about, are things we help our clients with in terms of how do you especially take a finance function from where it is today. And again, you look at a company that has scaled up significantly, from where it is today to where it needs to be to run a typical, the equivalent of a multinational organization that is kind of just $1 billion plus type. So that includes, systems roadmap. It's kind of just how do you do the organization planning, how do you optimize processes, standardize some of these processes, etc. Right? And then the third vertical is more about strategic finance. So as in, acting as a fractional CFO for a few companies, and it's less about the day to day and more about the strategic part of advising in, and again, just areas of business where it intersects obviously with finance. So for example, M&A type activity or commercial finance type activity, etc. So those are the three pillars that we continue to run. And it's been a great journey because the CFO, especially in multinationals, you tend to focus on some aspects of finance, but not necessarily on all the aspects, right? Like tax, for example, you don't tend to spend a ton of time on tax unless you have a problem, right? I'd say I've learned in the last year more than I've learned in the last few years combined, which has been an amazing journey.
And it's going well, I guess, the first year. How long I see a lot of people starting their own business now, right? So a year in, has it been easier than you expected? Has it been more difficult? Like, what's the reality? Because I know there's a lot of people going down the fractional CFO route. There's a lot of people starting out now. But from someone who's done it recently, what's the actual reality of doing that?
It's a roller coaster.
Yeah,
that's I think it's you kind of just said it right. It's an entrepreneurial journey, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, you have great days and you have just tough days, right? I think there are a couple of challenges as you transition that people don't tell you about as much, right? The first one is kind of just how much you continue to reshape the way you think about the business
and your offering, or
like what you want to focus on, what kind of makes sense, and again, think of this in a startup lingo, right? What's your value proposition, right? And what's your product
market fit, they call it, don't they?
Yeah. Exactly. Right? so that you need to, even though it's a bit of a different type of obviously of a business model. But you still need to do that a lot and actually ask yourself, are you focusing on the right things, or are you also enjoying yourself doing it as well? So that's one. How much time do you continue to reshape and question your business model, right? The second thing that nobody tells you is just is all of a sudden you don't necessarily have that support network. That
in terms of peers, I guess, or
peers, but also just admin support. You move from having teams and support and peers and people to to bounce ideas off to, the next day where you're just thinking on your own, and then you start having partners in some aspects and so on. But it's really just a challenge because all of you're like day one, you're looking at doing your business development, you're writing your proposals, you're executing some of those proposals, and you're chasing people to pay you, right? So it's like the
day one. That's pretty good if you're chasing for payment. You've done well.
Like maybe not day one, but you'd wish, right?
But the process of getting paid, I guess, like you need to chase the invoice. Right? It's just you.
Absolutely, right? And that's kind of like that takes getting a bit used to, right? That's kind of just I think the second one that was like, okay, I understand now that the job is a bit more than kind of just the focused part. And then the third is, which kind of just is a bit similar, but it really just is how much you miss then also that partnership until you're able to build it to just bounce ideas off, right? One of my favorite things we used to do is not necessarily brainstorm every week, but as you kind of just sit collectively with a couple of people and try to tackle a problem. Right, and then there's you completely realize the power of putting some more minds together and what comes out of that, right? So getting again to that part, and I've actually created a network of people that we meet every Tuesday, for example, at 10 a.m. and we kind of just share what are some of the things that are going on, and kind of just think together in some of this. So how do you actually put some of that infrastructure in place so that you're not missing out on it, right?
Yeah, I guess that's why, like you mentioned, that network around you of maybe other people in a similar position is so powerful.
Yeah,
right? Because
absolutely.
I guess it can be quite a lonely experience. Yep. And if you celebrate the wins, maybe it's better when you're doing it with people, and
Absolutely.
then the losses,
yeah.
maybe you need
yeah.
people around you. So one bit of advice you would give to someone who's looking maybe to go down this entrepreneurial journey, what would that be?
People will always kind of just put their plans together, and those plans will change constantly, right? And you'll never be able to really anticipate what's going to happen. I think the biggest one would be actually know that it's going to be an emotional roller coaster, and that's okay, right? And then put together or put in place mechanisms of support to manage that roller coaster, because basically in the down days, you want to be able to tap into that and know that the next good day is just around the corner, right? But it's a journey that's just very, very different.
Roller coaster, I think, is how you would summarize it then if anyone's looking to embark on a journey. So just to summarize then, just a few quick fire questions, because I know you've got quite an interesting career. So one in particular, where's the best place you've worked, would you say? Location?
Barcelona.
Yeah,
absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, it was...
There's no hesitation.
No,
so
absolutely not. I think I lived there for a year and a bit when I was 25.
Yeah.
And it was my second assignment in GE, so maybe I was 24 turning 25, and was one of the best years I've ever had.
Really? Favorite restaurant in Dubai?
Cochlear.
Yeah. Can't go wrong. You know what you're getting, don't you?
One of my other favorites is the Peruvian fusion ceviche.
Okay.
Really, really nice as well. Yeah. So it's really just a couple of those, and then actually some of the more traditional Indian places in Al-Karama.
Okay.
That kind of like,
And then what final piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
Early in my career, I actually just as an absolute workaholic, right? Just so I spent a lot more time working than spending time with the family, and just sometimes that meant I missed some of the soccer training or sports day at school for my kids. And as I grew older, I started kind of just realizing that I don't want to miss those, and just also took the time out to just see those. I would have done that earlier and more of it when I could.
Hindsight, right? I guess you look back, but at the time you're so engrossed, I guess, in just progressing, and
absolutely,
you've had obviously an amazing career. So maybe that's the sacrifice you had to make, I guess. But
well, that would be probably just the one thing I'd maybe
try be more present, maybe, or be more present to, I don't know, particular events, maybe for family and whatever. Don't always just be work.
Find that balance earlier.
Right?
Find the balance earlier.
Balance, does it exist?
No, but I think balance does not mean working X number of hours and that's it. It just means you prioritize what's important at that point. Right.
Really appreciate you joining. Hopefully it's been useful for the listeners, and we look forward to joining you all on the next episode.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.